Salvation Army is muted. We can't hear.
We're not getting audio on the Zoom.
We have we have a cyber gremlin.
There you go. There you go.
I'm good. Okay, well, we have 3 people saying I'm good, but they used to tell me I was good for 2 things: no good and good for nothing. All right. So there we are. Okay. Well, near vertical incident Skywave. This is something that a presentation I did way back in, I think, 2017. And it's an overview of not just NVIS, but especially for the newer hams. It's kind of a basic overview of antennas in general. So we'll try to go through this with some element of clarity, and hopefully that'll hold. The ABCs of NVIS, what are we going to cover today? Well, the uses and advantages, the importance of the ionosphere, the overview of propagation, types of antennas and some examples, and finally, antenna farms here and there. I don't know how many of you have seen some big antenna farms, but there's some amazing ones out there. Yeah. But before you start any kind of a presentation, and those who have heard this before, you have to put up with it again. You have to have a little sense of humor. So here's a question. What did the Buddhist monk say to the hot dog vendor? Of course, some of you might remember. He said, "Make me one with everything." All right. If you don't have indigestion, you will shortly. So what is NVIS? Well, it's near vertical incident Skywave. Okay, so what? It only operates on lower HF and really not above 40 meters. So 160 through 40 typically. It's a method of making RF propagation from a horizontally polarized antenna. Horizontal is the key. Radiating at a 70 to 90 degree vertical angle to the ionosphere. For those of you who have never had an experience with an NVIS antenna, that's an anathema, because you want a low angle of radiation under 30 degrees, and this is 75 to 90. So if you're new to this, you may be questioning it, but it really does work. The cool thing is it creates a 300 to 600 mile continuous coverage cone. And here's the big plus, with no skip zone. In other words, there ain't no dead places like there is with most HF and DX. So that's kind of a quick summary. What are some of the advantages? Well, there's a bunch of them. Like I mentioned earlier, it eliminates the skip zone, that dead zone. It requires no special equipment. Most hams that do HF already have what they need. It's effective, and this is kind of good, on all terrains and free from fading. So if you're in a situation that it's critical, like we did quite a few times here in eastern and central Washington with big fires, you want continuous communication. It has a very low signal-to-noise ratio for all methods of transmission, CW, sideband, and digital. It works well with low power. You don't need a megawatt or a kilowatt. 100 watts or less actually works well. It's easy to deploy, and it's very portable. And finally, or it isn't finally, it's omnidirectional radiation pattern. It really is essential in many emergency situations, whether it's in our continent here or overseas. And finally, simple dipoles work really well. And that's kind of surprising to most folks. So for those who are newer to the ham bands, it operates in the lower region of the HF band. And I'll show that with some other things here. The NVIS band selection, well, how do you know what band to use and when? Well, the next couple of things here looks a little complex to remember, but I'll kind of summarize it in the following slide. Periods of high solar activity for the daytime, 60, 40, and 30 works really well for NVIS. At nighttime, 60 and 80. During periods of low solar activity, it's a little bit different. 80, 60, and 40 are good in the daytime, and nighttime, 80 and 160. A lot of people don't know you can use 160 for NVIS, but it's only during that time of low solar activity. What's our solar activity now? I know there's people in my 3D group in front of me or 2D group online. Where are we now in our solar activity? And I know Michael Dinkelman might know. It's a great time. We're in a nice high, and that's not from what the audience here is drinking. So here's what you can remember from all that gobbledygook. The usable NVIS ham bands, really, daytime, 40 meters, almost always good. Nighttime, 80 meters. And this is, if you like 60, anytime. So that's kind of cool. What are some applications? Well, if you love contesting or you like rag chewing, the reality that you got 300 to 600 mile cone without any skip zone is great for those. And during emergencies, it's the same thing. You've got that same reliable, boy, is this ever small. Communications are possible, and I may have to get out my senior citizen glasses. So. Yep, there we are. Oh, look, there's a screen. Are possible out to a distance of, again, 300 to 600 miles. And what happened to the mouse?
It's on the other computer.
The wheel's not working, Jason. What's going on?
I think I just saw something.
Oh,
there we go.
Okay.
You've got a transition.
Okay. And only a small number of NVIS stations are required to provide a statewide network. This is what we did in Washington quite a few times with the fires in central and eastern Washington. Without that network, we would have had a real issue for communication. And amateurs can quickly establish that communication using NVIS because NVIS users readily available for HF equipment and really simple antennas like your dipoles. And finally, it works well on all the methods of propagate or transmission. So what are some of the types of NVIS antennas? Biggest one, dipoles. The simple dipole, which we'll cover in a minute. Inverted Vs. How many have used the AS2259? Oh, come on. We have no military people here? Okay. And the fan dipole, which I'll show you in a minute. Jumper doublets and loops. So those are the ones that actually work well with NVIS, but the simplest, easiest are dipoles. So let's take a look at the dipole. By the way, how many folks here in the room use dipoles right now?
Here's an off-center fed one.
Yeah? Works well, doesn't it?
Yes.
How does it load up?
Great.
So let's look at dipoles, since that's the, uh-oh, here we go again. The wheel doesn't work?
I think you have transition set up.
Yeah, okay. So do I do a tap dance or what? How do I get it to move?
Look to your right.
Just hit the right arrow key.
Now you're up a little bit.
Well, now we need filler space. Yes, yes. Well, you don't want a dad joke or a grandfather joke. Yes, Robert.
Well, just mention here, well, you mentioned contesting in there, and normally people can contest and want to reach out to other states and other countries. But if you work the salmon run, you want to work all the counties in Washington.
Yes.
Do that with NVIS antenna.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to go through that in detail if we're fortunate. Do what?
What screen do you want? You want it that? Yeah.
Oh,
Dipole antenna.
dipole antennas.
You have a screen in front of you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it says dipoles,
It's
yeah.
it's my Zoom meeting.
Yeah, but it's not progressing with the wheel. I wonder if it'll use, and it's not, this doesn't. Okay. Okay. Okay, there's the simple inverted V. Oh, it's working. Someone heard our prayers. Okay, now let's see if we can progress. So let's take a look at the dipole. We have three basic dipoles: flat top configuration, inverted V, and the sloper. How many have used a sloper? When do you use a sloper? Yeah. For those online, they said when nothing else works or when it does work. Okay. And one tree.
Well, yeah, when you don't have the room,
Yes, yes, yes. But for NVIS, most of the time you're going to do the best with the flat top or the inverted V, just because you need what? Horizontal polarization. My favorite, just because I have one, is the buddy pole. This is Chris, the son of the inventor of the buddy pole. And he's a really neat guy. But the buddy pole is neat because it's very portable, and you can make many configurations. I get no remunerations from the company. I just like it. Here's the buddy pole down in New Zealand. I thought that was kind of cool. Although New Zealand's a little bit different today than it was then. All right, so let's, and here's your multiband fan dipole. How many have used a multiband fan before? Just about 5, 6 of you. What are some of the advantages of the multiband and what are some of the downsides?
It sits in a single physical.
Right?
location that has multiple bands.
Yep, so it makes transitioning easier. Yep. Any downsides?
It depends. The one I had an inductor in the upper line,
Mm-hmm.
make it longer, so it was more loss.
Yep, and it takes more time to set up. Yeah, yeah. Exactly, yeah. So what are the requirements for NVIS? What's important? Well, it must be horizontal, not vertical. So that's a big, big thing. It needs to be at least or underneath a quarter wavelength, and that's typically 6 to 16 feet. So that's pretty easy to do in many setups. The takeoff angle should be 70 to 90 degrees, and that's really governed by the height above ground. If it's too low, under 6 feet, you may get quite a bit of loss. It just depends on the conductivity of the soil and, you know, that kind of thing. And finally, it requires at least 2 to 3 bands if you want 24-hour coverage. So it works very well, you know, for emergencies where it's a 3, 4, 5-day event. You need those 3 if you're multiband. For those that are newer to amateur radio, this is a little chart, if you will, that gives you an idea. Let's see, do I have kind of an arrow here? If you look here, most of HF is in this area here, the purple. NVIS is in the lower part of that, and it dips down into the medium wave radio area. That's your 160 band. You can see the rest of it, FM radio, long wave. VLF, is very long frequency, long wave, clear up into extremely high frequency or long waves. So they cover quite a range in the spectrum. And this is another illustration of the same thing. It's a little bit different because your medium frequency band encompasses 160, 80 meters, and a little bit of 40 in this illustration, where the one before, HF went further down towards 160. So it depends on which electrical engineer put this together, I guess. Let's briefly look at a really complex area called the ionosphere. Now, unfortunately, it says an AM transmitter in the lower left-hand corner, but that's just to illustrate that in this case, we're talking AM, it's a broadcast signal, not a transmitted signal like an amateur radio. We don't use the term broadcast in amateur radio because then you'd have to have a third-class, second, or first-class phone license. But it bounces off the ionosphere once, twice, sometimes 3 times to go to its intended receiver. But you have this thing called a ground wave down here, and if you're with a handy talkie standing, it probably goes, what, 8, 9 miles on a flat terrain. But if you're, you know, in a mast of a sailing ship, you might get out 30 miles. So distance on a ground wave makes a big difference. There's many layers to the ionosphere. Actually, there's more than what you see here. There's at least 5 major ones, troposphere, D, E, and then 2 F layers. But looking at it another way, you've got the ozone layer in there, you got the stratosphere sandwiched between, you have the mesosphere, sounds like you're in Central America or something, and the ionosphere. So it gets even more complex than that. I don't know if you can see this, it's kind of small, but on the right, the far right column are the miles and then the kilometers to the left. But you have troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, and it goes on up to thermosphere. I guess the reason they call it a thermosphere is when the astronauts run out of coffee, they go down into that area. Fill up there. Anyway. Sorry.
Don't quit the day job.
Yeah. Yeah, there wasn't a grown image on there. This kind of shows you the bending. It's not very clear. The next one actually shows more specifically the various bands and how they interact with the stratosphere. As you see, the UHF signals, the ultra high frequency, they just go flying through all layers, doesn't return. Same thing with most of the VHF, 2 meters. But how many of you have ever got a long distance reception or transmission on a VHF on your 2 meters? Why? Why does that happen? For those online, we had about 8 answers. Many were different. And Carl says they're wrong.
No.
All right, we can count on Carl. Occasionally, the point to remember is the ionosphere is not fixed in elevation, in altitude. It does shift. And so there are those rare times when it shifts enough that the VHF will actually be reflected down, and you'll get these long wave skips. But it doesn't happen very often. Scott, has it happened to you a lot?
We used to have a repeater in the Boston area, a repeater in New Jersey on the same frequency. And every once in a while, we would have a path between both repeaters. So we would reverse repeater in the Boston area and use the repeater down in New Jersey.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, thank you for that anomaly. I appreciate it. And of course, your HF signals almost always are reflected, but the higher the frequency, the longer the skip. Well, what about skipping and all that stuff? And guess what? Here we are again. It won't advance. Okay. So this is a simple illustration of ground wave and the sky wave, the skip zone and the skip distance. It's simple enough that new folks can, I think, get a good image of this in their head when they think about how propagation works. The ground wave is in the lower left-hand corner, and that varies, like we mentioned earlier, from 5 or 6 or 8 miles, maybe up to 30 miles if you have some elevation. But then you have this long skip zone. So as the sky wave goes up and reflects off of some layer of the ionosphere and then comes back down, that skip zone can be huge. So we'll have some illustrations of that in a moment. So ordinary DX and HF, DX stands for distance, long wave communication. The takeoff angle must be less than 30 degrees. And the lower it is, the further the skip is going to be, but the bigger the dead zone is going to be. It allows the signal to travel the maximum distance before it first arrives at the ionosphere. And the skip or can't speak now. The skip or dead zone is the long gap before the signal returns to Earth and the end of the ground wave. So that's illustrated right here in this drawing. So this compares the two. It's simple, it's straightforward. Your NVIS, it basically goes vertical. To do that, it needs to be horizontally polarized, where at 75 to 90 degrees. But if you want DX and HF, you need less than 30 degrees, and the lower it is, the farther it's going to reach out around the planet. This is a great little illustration for backpackers or for search and rescue or for people in emergency situations. If your transmitter, let's see if I can find the wonderful pointer, if your base station, or here you are, and you're in trouble, and you need to transmit out of there, in a regular HF antenna, you're stuck. Where with NVIS, you stick up a 6 to 16 foot dipole, and you can climb right over the mountains and speak, communicate with the remote station 1 or 2 very easily. So it's really quite amazing. And here are 3D illustrations for a half-wave dipole versus an NVIS dipole. This area down here in the half-wave, all this white area is the skip zone, the dead zone. Where if you look at the NVIS, it's pretty much covered, about 100% of it. And we'll see that. It looks like this. Looks like a figure 8 for the half-wave, and it looks like an ellipse or one of the donuts we ate this morning. No, maple bar, whatever. So down in Texas, this is what it would look like. If you're standing in Dallas, Texas, the illustration on the left would look like that. If you have an NVIS, it would look like the one on the right. Let's zoom in a little bit. So if you're up here in Oklahoma, if somebody has an HF antenna, they don't hear you. Or down in San Antonio, you don't exist. With the NVIS, look at this. Covers virtually 80% of the state of Texas. That's pretty cool. Pretty easy. if you're here in the Pacific Northwest, in our region, in Seattle and Tacoma and so forth, we can reach almost out to Montana or to some of the fishing boats that like to go way out into the Pacific, all with an NVIS antenna. So what's the background of NVIS? How did it come about? Any idea? Okay, we have a library moment. Well, first of all, we already covered this, but let's go on down. It's not new. The military used NVIS a lot during World War II, over in Korea, and during Vietnam. And here was our wonderful AS-2259. Has anybody seen that at the swap meets? Yep. How much were they selling for? They were selling for under $100, and they work great. They're a little, well, I won't say clumsier to hook up or mount or whatever on the ground, but they work well. Do you know what else this was called? This antenna, instead of the name? It was a Collins antenna. How many have owned Collins? Yeah, it's kind of the creme. Wanted to. It was the Maserati, the Lamborghini of amateur radio for many, many, many years. It was basically military-grade amateur radio. And this antenna was used, you know, in WW2 and Vietnam and Korea. They would just erect it and hook it up to their PRC-25, and away they go. These are some of the dimensions for one way of hooking up an NVIS antenna. It's not the only way. This one is 15 feet high. And mine here is so small, unless I don't have magnifying glasses on. Can you see that enough? No? Okay. Get out your telescopes. Okay. So we've looked at the dipole. Now it's time, and we looked at the flat top and the inverted V for NVIS. So let's move on to this guy, the vertical. Well, is which polarization is the vertical? All right, that was a trick question. Well, here's a very, very small vertical. They're smaller, but it's only 7 inches, known as a rubber duck for your HTs. What's an HT? Well, for those of you who are really new, an HT is a handy-talkie. And so that small 7-inch, it's pretty small vertical. What about this vertical? That's only 66 feet high. And how many years have we been putting that up at Fort Flagler for field day? Yeah, long time. Because it was located down at what we call CW Beach, continuous waves. Get it? Continuous waves. Okay. And if you look really closely, that vertical, I'm having lots of fun with this, is all right here. See it going up? And that's not even the top of it. And it's a lot of fun to put up. Okay. But can you have a vertical that's an NVIS? How do you do it? That's right. You make it horizontally polarized. So this is what is that, a Jeep Cherokee? I don't know what it is. But you just bend it down.
That's why the military has their Humvees with the antenna bent over. You think that they bend them over so they can go under underpasses, but they bend them to make an NVIS.
That's right. And I paid him because that's the segue to this picture. It's not a true Humvee. They call it a Hummer. Not the same. But I'd like people to look and identify. Of course, you see the vertical that's no longer vertical. It's horizontal. What are some of the other antennas? What is this antenna here?
Actually, it would be a post.
Is it a post? It probably is, but it's reminiscent of Mike Dinkelman's screwdriver antenna on the back. I don't know if it is. I couldn't tell. And what about this? And what about this guy here? What is it? Yeah. It basically is a vertically polarized loop. That's kind of cool. But again, it's vertically polarized, so it wouldn't be good for NVIS. And then you can see the other three, sorry. These pictures, I don't know how well you see them online. And notice where he's from. Where is the K9 located? What states? Illinois, what else? Wisconsin, yeah. And yep, and because this is a K9 automobile, he's allowed to carry dogs.
Please.
Okay, all righty. Now let's look at the Yagis, or as they say, where's Toku? Yagis, right? Okay. So Yagis came about, I don't know, a long time ago. Anybody have a year on the Yagis? 20s, yeah. Yep. Came in when TVs, what's that? Anyway. You've got a boom upon which are mounted all these, and we got a chuckler in the audience. You have one driven element, which is the hot one. That's the red one. You got a reflector, which kicks it on down the road in a forward direction, if you will. And the green are the directors, which focuses your signal, somewhat like a flashlight. I won't say a laser, they're not that focused, but they work very well. And they come in all, not shapes, but all sizes. You have small ones, and I know one guy here has one. Steve Marth uses it for what? Satellite. And is it tricky or does it work easily? Yeah. How many other folks have used this kind of antenna? Yeah. It's kind of cool, actually. And you get 2 to 3 minutes of a satellite, maybe longer if you're lucky. Yeah. And of course, you have your traditional Yagi or beam. But most of them you see are horizontally polarized. When do you see a vertically polarized Yagi or beam?
FM repeater work.
FM work,
VHF.
cell phones, right? And CBers use it. You know what CB stands for? Children's band. Okay. All right. So let's look at the loop, like some of us late Saturday night. How many of you have built a loop? Yeah, and how do they work?
Well,
Well, first of all, what do they look like? They look like this. The top two are what kind of polarization? Vertical. The bottom two? Horizontal. So which one would you use for NVIS? Duh. Yeah, the bottom two.
I've got one like the right-hand bottom one I use in 6 meters a lot.
Yep, you used to see those all the time on vehicles in the 60s, 70s, pre-digital. Yeah. But what's the challenge of a loop? Well, space is
Also holding them up. Radiating equally poorly in all directions.
yep. And what about the bandwidth? Tuning it.
Extremely narrow.
Yes, it's extremely narrow. Right. So that's one of the disadvantages. But boy, if you get it tuned right, they can work very, very well. Take up very little space. They're good for attics and things like that. All right. Yeah, no, not the ones in Seattle. The attics up in your, anyway. The cubicle quad. Yay, this was my favorite antenna as a kid, and I used it for 6 months until it blew down. Cubicle quads are amazing. They look like this, like a very sophisticated, no, and the reason you don't, why?
you do see it for satellite.
You see them for satellite work. They, I'll put it this way. I had a 14 AVS vertical back in 63 to 67. And I consistently worked 5, 7 all over the world with it on 20 meters. When I put up this monstrosity of a cubicle quad made with 2x4 for a boom and bamboo for the cross members, oh my gosh, and the X's, it weighed a ton, and I had to get my 6'6" cousin who weighed 300 pounds to help me put it up. I could work 5, 9, 9 every time. And you just rotate that thing and it was amazing. What's the biggest problem with cubicle quads? Well, first of all, you got to get them up in the air. And they're great for drying your clothes on. But the problem is wind resistance. They'll blow down. There are some really good commercial ones out there. And I know a couple of guys that use them and they love them because they're so efficient. They're just amazing. So directive. They're like having a rhombic that's rotatable. And here's 2 other cubicle quads. I call the upper one in the left the snowflake cubicle quad, and the one on the right I call a bad hair day. It looked like a spider that was on, I don't know, something. But I don't know what how that guy operated. Yeah, Robert.
I can answer that. That's the fractal path.
Yes,
That's the space that the antenna occupies.
exactly.
If you had a cubicle quad with all of those lines laid out straight, that would be 4 times the size, like linear loading.
It's like loading coils. They function differently, but the end result is similar. Yeah. Yeah, the inductance and reactance is different, though.
Yeah, it's done according to a formula, and that's what produces that.
Yeah.
Similarity. We'll talk about the wind load.
Yeah, you don't want to get loaded with a cubicle quad. It goes down. All right, and then let's look at the coolest antenna and the most difficult is the rhombic. The rhombic antenna is amazing, but it takes what? A lot of real estate, right? Yes. And yet, the big advantages, tremendous signals, but only in very specific direction. I couldn't find good, and I can't even read this with this small screen. Basically, you have 4 wires, you have 4 supports. When I was down in the Philippines back in '85, because I spent 20 years in the Army, and what was I doing down in the Philippines? Anyway, they had 4 gigantic ones. Each of the pylons or supports were 66 feet high, and they were like 4 feet across the pylon. They were huge and thick, I guess, cement. And they had 4 huge ones, and they could work the entire world with these 4 any time of day or night. It was amazing. And they're fairly simple if you have the real estate and the, I would say the creativity and stick-to-itiveness to erect it. But you have to have a resistor opposite the feed line, and the formulas aren't that hard. If you have, the land, they're amazing, but usually it's pretty much so directional that you'd need to have 4 of them to work the compass. So they're really amazing. If you can look really carefully, now these aren't the big thick posts, but you can barely see that if they had blue sky, you could see it, but the wires you can see, and so on and so forth. So rhombics, great. Okay, so what's next? Let's focus on the dipole. And that's what we've just completed, but I'd like to show you some antenna forms since our time is limited. First of all, we showed this rolling antenna farm. This guy can work quite a bit in terms of the different frequencies and bands. Look at this guy. How many do you count there? Yagis or beams. Yeah. And if you look really careful, right here, you see this guy, there's a man up there. That's Mike Dinkelman. Right there. Right? Well, you'll see him later. Okay, here's another antenna farm. How many antennas do you count here? Well, name them. What the antennas we talked about. How many Yagis or beams do you see? How many verticals? How many dipoles? I mean, in this small amount of real estate, this guy maybe overdid it. How about this one? This guy reminds me of some guy on Fox Island, except the trees aren't very tall. This antenna here is about 140 feet up. Yep, that's right. Mike's not in this photo, though. And in this one, Old Crow. What kind of antennas are these? Yep. Yep. And what's this one over here in the corner? Yep. Almost looks like a J-pole. Almost. All righty. But there is a Yagi there. And there's a murderous creature up on top, too, a crow. Here's another guy who likes towers. And I bet you he gets out. But if you look over here, I think is that a cubical quad? We're only seeing part. See the X? I'm not sure. It's not really clear. And up on top of this, what's that? That's a tall J-pole. What about this antenna? Where's that? That's on a mountaintop. What do we call that mountaintop?
Steve's backyard.
We call it K7 LED. Yep. And who are these guys down at the base? These are grounding rods. This guy here is sitting over there. That's Hal. And this guy here is that guy here, Steve. And their respective automobiles. Can you guys tell me a little bit about the antennas here in this picture?
Most of them are what are called station master type antennas for users got some rankings up there for rankings or
Well, then you're going to repeat that before they can't hear it.
Yeah, what Hal Goodall, our radio officer for the club, is saying is that there's a whole lot of antennas up there. The only thing that's not there is a long wire. There is? Okay, I stand corrected. And my feet are getting tired. Oh, okay. There are many types of antennas up there on top of Tiger Mountain. And this is east or west? East Tiger Mountain. If you ever have a chance to go up there with Hal, it's really an experience. Been up there 4 or 5 times. It's a lot of fun. Except when it's snowing.
There's a little snow up there right now.
And of course, this antenna farm, many of you know who have been to Fort Flagler for field day. And how many types of antennas do we have there? Come on, guys and gals. Yep. Well, the 40-meter one from Dean, I don't think was set up yet when this picture was taken. He usually has 2 of them. But there's all kinds up here. And this is up on the bluff. And down below, at CW Beach, where all the waves come in, we have another series of antennas. Let's zoom in a little bit. And boy, this is a little harder to see. There's our 66-foot vertical over here. And please help me, is this the 20-meter Yagi here? And this one at 45 degrees is our 40-meter. And this is our 15 vertically polarized. Yep. And here is Mike Dinkelman's truck. Okay. And here is Mike Dinkelman. As you can see, we have a lot of fun at CW Beach putting these things up. It's an adventure and it's fun. You have good camaraderie, and he relies on us, so he stays put. Here he is doing chin-ups on the boom, staying in shape. And of course, the CW element of the club is maintained by Mr. Dinkelman. But who are these two guys? Well, the club went to the Dogs a long time ago, the Huskies. I wanted to show you another antenna farm on Fox Island that the gentleman, Hal, on the right has. Here is one of his little antenna setups. And Hal, how many antennas are here? How many beams do we have? So a 6-meter array, a 40-meter 2-element, a 30-meter 3-element full size, 18-meter, a couple 2-meter antennas. I'm an echo. A what? And it varies antenna. Okay. Here's another, the one on the right, this one over here. That's a 2-meter EME rig. 4 Yagis. Yep. So as you can see, now how about this one? If you look real careful, you'll see a human right there, and that's Hal.
Well, why does Andy have to climb the tower?
Oh my. 4 or 5 element Yagis. Yeah. And for moon bounce, which ones do you use? Right here. So Hal is very much into moon bounce and meteor scatter and other transitory excitement in amateur radio. Very transitory. And this is another view of one of his towers. Yep. And there's more of a close-up. Here he was taking his afternoon nap. Okay. So antenna farms. Now you've had a brief glimpse, or time's almost up. Yes? No, I tried to get a hold of that last night and didn't get a hold of it. That isn't. Actually, if you want to see a log periodic that's very large, as you're going down by Fort Lewis, on the other side of the highway, this is the one for Madigan Army Medical Center. On the west side is a log periodic at the National Guard. Next time you go on I-5 South, look to your right as you go by the Madigan exit or entrance. Look to your right, and you'll see a log periodic. It's huge. So.
It's really a thing of beauty.
Yes, yes. Yes, you can put that in your log.
They offered one of those.
With what?
They offered the club one of those.
Oh, yeah.
I heard about that. Yeah. But they're enormous.
We had no purpose.
So, yeah, we had no order.
Yeah. In fact, they're almost too big. What?
We had one of those at the Portland International Guard to go to California. They had one. That dang thing, I forget how tall the starting is.
Right,
And then
right.
it came down to real close.
Yeah, Gil saying in the audience,
The stage all along the way to keep the log away.
right. Yeah, Gil in our 3D audience was saying they used to have one in the National Guard where you weren't assigned there, you were just,
No, I was there.
you were there. Good. Well, we'll salute you when we get outside. You don't salute indoors usually. Must be Navy. Yeah, well, spending 20 years in the Army, I did, you know. Anyway, it was good. So we went from a very small vertical antenna. Wait a minute, which way are we going? To one of the largest amateur radio antenna in the world. Does anybody know the history for this?
Oh, that's OH8X.
Finland.
That's OHAX, 8X. And it was constructed in 2007 to 9, and in 2013 it collapsed. Why?
Wind.
Well, no, it's way north of Helsinki up in basically almost the Arctic Circle. Guess how long the boom is? 200 feet long. Guess what the elevation is? 330 feet high. And it's full 80 meter and 160. How much does it weigh? 80,000 pounds. And when that puppy came down, the squirrels were not happy. So that was the largest. Here's the other one I couldn't get any info on. Does anybody know where this was? This was an amateur or is an amateur radio. Supposedly the largest one, but I think the other one's larger. I don't know, but it's a real antenna. Amateur radio antenna. Yeah.
I think it's in Russia, but my neighbors would hate that.
Yes, one of the men in the audience said his neighbors would hate this antenna. All right, so in review, let's look quickly. Near vertical incident skywave antenna operates only on the lower HF bands, not above 40 meters. It's a method of making the RF propagation from a horizontally polarized antenna radiating at 70 to 90 degrees vertical angle to the ionosphere, and creates, and this is really important, this 300 to 600 mile continuous coverage cone with no skip zone. Super cool. The advantages, again, eliminates that skip zone, no special equipment, all terrain, no fading, low signal to noise ratio, works really good with low power, really good to deploy and real portable, omnidirectional, great for emergencies, and simple dipoles work very well. Usable ham bands are 40, 80, and 60 with the day, night, and all the time. How many operate in 60 meters, by the way? Yeah. Yeah, cool. So, amateur radio, thank you, Toku, for all your faithful years of service to us here at Ham Club. And of course, there's a very practical use of NVIS. For all of us that are soiled senior citizens, you will appreciate this. This is when you need NVIS to reach your local ships. So with that, remember, this is the relaxing end, 73 and 88. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Question?
I got a question.
Oh, yes, questions.
Yeah, question. This
Questions
is Ross.
from the 3D audience. Yes.
You can rotate that and change it, like you showed Texas as an oval. If you rotated the antenna, would that rotate the oval?
You are talking loop or which kind of antenna? The dipole? Sure.
There are rotatable dipoles.
Absolutely. Sure. You could, but you'd have to spin it real fast. Any other questions from our local audience here? How about online?
I've got a question. Whiskey 7 Romeo Oscar.
Okay,
Victor.
with that?
Yeah.
Oh. I guess we have an online.
Yeah.
I know Robert has one.
Daniel, I'm
F2.
online.
Off the top of my head. The FOF2 is a indicator of what it's the bottom end of the spectrum in terms of what will work.
F2 is the bottom end of the spectrum that will work.
Yeah, and it will, I'm sorry, I'm blanking a little bit on
Terminology.
how it works, but it will give you an indication of which bands will work better at that time for
The F2 layer is an indicator of the bands that will work well at that time. Does that help?
Yeah.
If it doesn't, I don't have any further information. Okay.
No, that helped a lot.
Daniel Stevens.
I was hoping for maybe more detail, but that's the experience I've had. We tried to have I tried to set up an an NVIS net on Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock. And looking at the IONOSONDE map, you know, when that critical frequency passes by the Seattle area, boy, it just really drops off like a stone. So anyhow, if you guys want to play around with NVIS, Tuesday nights at 7, I'll be on the air, and usually it's 80 meters. I'll put the frequencies in the chat.
Very much for that offer. That's really great. Yeah, and Robert, go ahead.
A couple of comments. There are several nets that operate on 40 and 80 in the Pacific Northwest that are essentially NVIS.
Yeah, Robert is going to almost say there's several clubs or nets that operate on 40 and 80.
Yeah, typically some of them are emergency nets, some of them are just regional nets. Like
Where's the best way to locate those? Because I don't think they're in our...
Doing around 40 and 80 in the early evening.
Around 39.
Go to the ARRL site and look it up on the net.
Right. So go to ARRL and look it up on their nets. You can locate it. And Robert, again.
Yeah, my other comment is the importance of NVIS in emergency communications. An example of this is the state EOC.
Robert, could you come up? Oh, there's a microphone back there.
Microphone back here. Okay.
Robert is getting to a mic.
The state EOC is currently organizing amongst the various counties and emergency groups to survey repeaters that they would use in emergency. And we just had a meeting a week ago on Zoom to start this project. But the significance of NVIS for this is they acknowledge that, and a lot of the counties mentioned, that they're not going to be able to reach them on repeaters because they're in central or eastern Washington. And secondly, the repeaters may be down. And pretty much everyone acknowledged that the bottom line, the fundamental fallback for emergency communications will be NVIS on HF to get to between the state and the other areas.
This is why it's it's a critical component of amateur radio that is often forgotten about over the years. And I think Robert just demonstrated that. So thank you. Appreciate the info.
Robin, this is
Other
Daniel.
questions?
Yeah, I got a couple things, Robin. Iditarod is going to have their 50th year this year. And they've used the NVIS antenna for 50 years up there on 20, 40, and 80.
Which is like 3975 and 3910 all day long. With the radios on, because if somebody got into trouble on the road, they just dial up that frequency and shout out for help, and somebody would hear them.
Or were they using NVIS?
Yes, they were using NVIS.
There you go.
We didn't call it NVIS.
You call it antennas that work.
But, you know.
Yeah. He was just saying in the old days, prior to repeaters being in the Pacific Northwest, they used NVIS, but they didn't call it that, to communicate for emergency purposes when you're driving down the road. You know, either that or use citizens band. Okay.
Robin, this is Daniel.
Oh, Daniel Stevens.
Yep, I'm online.
Okay, Jason's on it, Daniel. Stand by.
Are you ready? Hello. Hello.
Found you.
I can hear you guys. Are you ready? Hello.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Iditarod's 50th year is starts in March here, and they've used NVIS for 50 years on here. We'd use 20 meters in the daytime, 40 and 80 at night. They use a long dipole with jumper set up for the different bands on that. My brother, David, KL7B EB, is online. He is section manager from Alaska. He's been out on the trail many times. and had a dipole he'd wrap around a coffee can with the coax fed in the center of it so you can deploy it very easily. We used NVIS on Ramrod to pass out the digital packets out. And I disagree with you on above 40 meters because we used it on 20 up in Alaska for years and years and years with our data rod there very effectively. You asked about the upper limits of it. The NVIS needs to be a tenth to quarter wave above the ground. You get above quarter wave, it stops losing its cone-shaped propagation situation. On the Diderot trail, it's 1,049 miles long, so we use the NVIS out of Anchorage for a little over half the trail, then transfer the headquarters out to Nome to finish the race off. So it's been used a lot up there in Alaska, and it does work on 20. Go ahead and back, Robin.
Daniel, that's really good information and good history there as well. So any other questions, either from 2D or 3D? Okay, I leave you with this. As you wander on through life, whatever be your goal, keep your eye upon the donut and not upon the hole.
Okay.
And that's because we have 3 boxes of good donuts here. All righty, bye-bye.
All right, I think we'd take about a 5-minute break or so, get yourself some coffee, a